My father did not speak of that winter, not once in all the years I had him after. He would let the fire burn down to coals and look at the door as if he expected the cold to come knocking again, and then he would go to bed without a word. So I will speak of it for him, because I was there, and because the truth of it deserves to outlast the lie they told about her. I was 5 years old the winter we found her. My brother Asa and I were not yet old enough to understand what the word murderess meant, only old enough to understand that the whole of Crane's Hollow used it to mean her, the way they used the word cold to mean the wind. We found her freezing behind the trading post, a woman the entire valley had decided was not fit to live among them. We gave her our coats. We begged our father to keep her. And the valley would spend the next 10 years trying to forget what came of that, and failing, every single one of them, until the day they died. This is how it happened. The frost came early to Montana Territory in the year 1886. The old men in the hollow felt it in their knees before they saw it in the sky, and they were right to be afraid, for that was the front edge of the winter that would kill more cattle than any season before or since. But the cold that mattered to Eliza Dunmore had come long before the first frost. It had been settling on her for the better part of a year, ever since the morning they pulled a burned body from the ruin of her husband's house and decided, all together and at once, that she had put him there. Her name had been a respectable one. Silas Dunmore had come to the valley 3 years prior with money in his saddlebags and a smile that opened doors, and he had married the prettiest girl in the territory, and people had liked them both well enough until the fire. Then a man named Silas was dead, and the house was ash, and there was talk of poison in the well and a wife who had stood too calm in the firelight. There was no trial. There did not need to be one. A town can hang a woman without a rope. They only have to agree to look through her, and they had agreed. Eliza was 24 that winter, though the cold had aged her hands to an old woman's. She lived in a leaning shed at the edge of the hollow that no one would have wanted, with a stove that took more wood than it gave back heat. She had sold everything that would sell. And on the morning my story truly begins, she had 1 silver coin left in the world, and 4 days of emptiness in her belly, and she walked into Harlan Voss's trading post to spend that coin on flour because there was nowhere else in 40 miles to spend it. The bell over the door rang. The talk inside stopped the way it always stopped when she came in, like a held breath. "Mr. Voss," her voice was steadier than she was, "a sack of flour and a little salt pork if you have it, I can pay." Harlan Voss did not look up from his ledger. He was a heavy man who took a great deal of pride in his clean counter, and he wiped at it now with a rag, slow, as though her presence had dirtied it. "We're closed to your kind, Mrs. Dunmore. Sheriff Tate's word. We don't sell to them that poison their own husbands." "I poison no one." "Then the Lord will sort it out," said Mrs. Dell, who stood by the stove with a bolt of calico in her arms and a great deal of satisfaction on her face. "In the meantime, you've got nerve, coming in here where decent women shop. Go home if you can call that hole a home." "I have no food," Eliza said, and her voice cracked on the last of it, the dignity going out of her all at once. "Please, I haven't eaten in 4 days. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking to buy." "Then I suggest you ride out of the hollow," said Voss, "and go find whatever poor fool will have you. There's none here." She stood a moment longer. I have tried over the years to imagine what it costs a person to stand in a room full of people who want you dead and ask them quietly for bread. I do not think I have the measure of it even now. Then she turned, and the bell rang again, and she went out into the cold. She did not get far. There is an alley between the trading post and the livery where the wind funnels down off the ridge, and the shipping crates stack up frozen, and that is where her legs gave out. She sat down on the ice with her back against the wall, and she pulled her thin shawl around her, and she put her face in her hands, and she made the decision a body makes when it has run out of reasons. She would let the cold take her. It would be quiet, at least. They would find her in the spring thaw, and they would not be sorry. And that would be the end of the lie they'd told, because the dead can't argue. That is how she was sitting when my father came down the mountain. I remember the smell of him more than the sight in those days. Jonas Holt came into a room like weather. He was a big man, made bigger by the buffalo coat he wore, and he smelled of pine pitch and wood smoke and the inside of a trap line, and he despised town with a purity that I have never seen matched in another living soul. He came down off Tamarack Ridge twice a year and not a day more, to trade his furs for the things a man cannot make from a deer, and he counted the hours until he could leave. He had not always been that way. There had been a woman named Naomi once, our mother, who had been soft where he was hard and who had laughed at his silences until they cracked. She died when Asa and I were two, of a fever that came in the night and took her before the snow let a rider through. After that, my father took us up the ridge and built a wall of grief around the three of us and dared the world to climb it. He did not trust people. He trusted his rifle, and he trusted his hands, and, God help him, he trusted his two wild sons not to fall off the mountain while he ran the lines, which was a great deal of trust to place in boys who could barely tie their own boots. That morning he had a stack of beaver and fox pelts over his shoulder, prime winter coats, and he set them on Voss's counter and named what he wanted in as few words as a man could use. Flour, coffee, salt, boots for the boys. He did not take off his coat. He did not intend to stay. And while Voss tallied the furs and tried to cheat him on the count, Asa and I did what we always did in town, which was to get bored and get gone. We slipped out the front. The town was loud and it stank of horses, and there was nothing in it for two boys raised on a mountain, so we went around the side of the building to throw ice at the wall, which was the height of entertainment as far as we were concerned. And that is when Asa stopped, with his arm cocked back to throw, and went still. There was a lady sitting in the snow. I have to tell you that we had never seen a person sit in the snow before. People did not do that on the ridge. The snow would kill you. So the wrongness of it struck us before anything else, and we crept up on her the way our father had taught us to creep up on a hurt animal, slow, hands where it could see them. Lady, Asa said. She lifted her head. I will never forget her face, though I have tried to describe it 100 times and always come up short. Her lips were a color lips are not supposed to be. Her eyes took a long moment to find us, the way a person's eyes do when they are most of the way to somewhere else. And then they found us, two small boys in oversized coats with our breath plumbing, and something moved behind them. I know now what it was. It was the thing in her that the whole valley had tried to convince her did not exist. It was the thing they had named a murderess to bury. She looked at two cold children and the dying went out of her face, and what came into it instead was worry. You'll catch your death, she whispered. Out here, without mittens, where's your mother? Asa, who was the bolder of us by a full minute, said, We don't got one. She looked at us for a long while. Then she did a thing I did not understand for many years. She reached into the pocket of her thin dress, and she took out the last thing she owned that was not for trade, the only thing she'd kept back from all that selling, and held it toward us in a shaking hand. It was a small daguerreotype in a tin case, the kind a person keeps a face in. I did not know whose face. She held it out as though she had to give us something, as though a person who had nothing left could not bear to be given to without giving back. But Asa did not take the picture. Asa instead took off his coat. He was 5 years old and the wind cut like a knife, and he unbuttoned his big wool coat with his clumsy red fingers and laid it over her lap. And I did the only thing that made sense to me, which was to put my arms around her so she would have my warmth too, the way we slept against our father on the cold nights. She was so cold it frightened me. I remember pressing my face against her arm and feeling the cold of her through the cloth, and not understanding how a person could be that cold and still be a person. You're colder than the creek, I said, accusing, as if she'd done it on purpose. And she made a sound that was half a laugh and half something else, and she put her thin arm around me, and that is how my father found us. Two of his boys, the only thing left in the world he allowed himself to love, wrapped around the murderess of Crane's Hollow in the snow. I have thought a great deal about the look on his face. I was too young to read it then, but I have built it in my memory from the man I came to know. There was fear in it first, the animal fear of a father who has lost one half of his family and will not survive losing the other. His rifle came up. His voice came out like a landslide. "Get away from her, now." We did not move. That is the part the valley could never forgive, I think, that two small boys would not move. Asa took a fistful of her sleeve and held on. "Pa," he said, "no." "Asa, hold. She's freezing." My brother's chin came up the way it did when he had decided a thing all the way through. "And she don't got a coat now 'cause I gave her mine. And she said we'd catch our death and she don't even know us." Pa, he looked up at the giant standing over us, and he asked the question that the whole valley would be repeating in horror by nightfall, the question that became a scandal and then a saying and then, finally, the truest thing any of us ever said. "Mama's gone and she's cold. Can we keep her?" The wind blew. My father stood there with his rifle in his hand, a man who had sworn off the whole human race, and he looked down at the woman in the snow. She tried to push us away from her. I remember that. Even then, half dead, she tried to get us off her so we wouldn't be tarred by her, so the big terrible man wouldn't think she'd lured us. "I'm sorry," she got out. "I didn't ask them. I swear to you I didn't ask them. I'll go." My father crouched down. He did it slow, the way he'd taught us, and his great size folded down until he was level with her, and the wind broke against his back instead of her face. He looked at her for a long time. He was not looking at her the way the town looked at her. The town looked at her to confirm what they already believed. My father looked at her the way he looked at sign on the trail, reading it true. "You're the Dunmore woman," he said. It was not a question. He had heard the gossip same as everyone. "I'm not what they say I am." She said it without much hope, the way you say a thing you've given up being believed about. "I just wanted to buy flour." He stood up. I watched him look at the trading post window, and I followed his eyes, and there was Voss and Mrs. Dell and 2 or 3 others, faces pressed near the glass, watching the show. Watching a woman freeze in their alley and a mountain man decide what to do about it, and offering nothing, not a blanket, not a fire, not a hand. I learned later what was running through him in that moment, because he told me once late when I was grown. He told me he hated that town with everything he had, and he hated them most right then. And he told me plainer that he needed help. His traps were failing because he spent half his days making sure his sons didn't walk off a cliff. He had a practical man's reason ready to give himself, and I think it let him do the thing his heart wanted before his pride could stop it. "Stand up," he told her. She tried. Her legs would not hold her. So my father handed his rifle to Asa, who took it solemnly with both hands, and he bent and gathered her up out of the snow as though she weighed no more than a fawn, coat and all, and he carried her toward the front of the trading post. We trotted after him. The bell rang. The talk died. "Caldwell," started Voss, and then caught himself because that was a different man's name. What he said was, "Holt, what in the name of God are you doing?" "Sheriff Tate." My father did not stop walking. There was a man in the corner with a tin star and a soft belly, and my father aimed his words at him like a rifle. "You let a woman freeze in your alley today. I'm taking her up the ridge to cook and mind my boys. Add 2 blankets and a pair of women's boots to my tab, Voss." Sheriff Tate found his nerve, the way small men do in numbers. "That woman's a murderess. We've a mind to run her out." "Then you've got a mind to climb my mountain and tell me about it." My father stopped at the door and turned, and the cabin quiet of the store went quieter still. "There's a trail up Tamarack. Any man who's got a quarrel with where I keep my own house, he's welcome to walk it and we'll discuss it, him and my Winchester and me. Anybody." "Nobody." He turned and walked out into the cold, and Asa carried the rifle, and I held the door. And that is how Eliza Dunmore left Crane's Hollow, in the arms of a man the town feared more than they hated her. The ride up the ridge took the rest of the day. She lay in the bed of the sled wrapped in furs with a hot stone against her chest, and the hollow dropped away below us under the pines, and the air got thin and clean and bitter, and I remember she stopped looking afraid somewhere around the second switchback. I asked her later, years later, what she'd been thinking on that ride. She said she had been thinking that she was probably being carried up a mountain to be murdered herself, and that even so it was the safest she had felt in a year, and that both of those things being true at once had told her something about how low she'd been brought. Our cabin sat against a granite shoulder of the ridge with the forest at its back. It was a hard, plain place, all traps and hides and the smell of leather, a house with the soft worn out of it. My father set her down by the fire and laid out the terms in his flat way, because he did not know how to do a kind thing without armoring it. Boys sleep in the loft. You take the bed in the corner, I sleep on the cot. You cook, you mend, you keep these two from killing themselves while I run the lines. You eat what we eat and the town leaves you be. That's the trade. He did not look at her while he said it. Don't mistake it for kindness. You can't carry your weight, I'll bring you back down myself. Yes, Mr. Holt. Jonah's, he said to the fire. And there's no charity up here. There's work and there's the door. For 3 weeks the cabin learned a new rhythm, and I will tell you, the town had her wrong about everything. But they had her wrong about this most of all. They thought she was soft. They thought she was a poisoner because a poisoner is what a soft, scheming woman does in their minds, and they could not see her any other way. But Eliza Dunmore was not soft. She scrubbed the soot from our floors with lye until her knuckles bled and never said a word about it. She baked bread that made the whole cabin smell like something I did not have a word for, because I had been 2 when our mother died, and I did not remember bread like that. She worked the tangles out of our hair with a comb and a patience that none of the town's decent women would have spent on us. And in the evenings she told us stories and tucked us in and woke us to clothes warmed by the fire. And we brought her things. I do not know which of us started it. Asas says it was him. I say it was me. But it became our way of saying what we did not have the words for. I brought her a blue jay's feather I'd found in the snow and put it on her pillow, and she made such a fuss over it, held it to the light and turned it like it was made of glass, that the next day I had to find her something better. So I brought her a creek stone worn perfectly round. Asab brought her a brass button he'd found God knows where, and a pinecone, and the bleached jaw of a mouse, which she received with the same grave thanks as the feather, though I saw her face do a complicated thing. By the end of the second week she had a little row of our offerings along the windowsill above her bed, and she would not let our father throw out a single one of them, not even the mouse jaw. My father watched all this in his silence. He was a man in a cage he had built himself, and he had expected her to rattle the bars. His Naomi, our mother, had been a town girl, and she had hated the mountain, had hated the howl of the wolves and the white silence and the closeness of the trees. She had tried, in the end, to flee it. She had set out for the valley on foot in a storm, and she had frozen to death less than a mile from the cabin. And my father had carried that mile on his back every day for 3 years, and would have told you, if you'd been fool enough to ask, that her death was his fault for keeping her where she could not live. So he waited for the mountain to break Eliza the way it had broken his wife. He waited for the complaints, the weeping, the long looks down the trail toward the valley. They never came, because the mountain was not a prison to her. The valley had been the prison. The mountain was the first place in a year that did not look at her with hate, and she did not want to leave it, and slowly, day by day, my father came to understand that. I caught them once. I was supposed to be asleep in the loft, and I leaned out over the rail, and below me my father sat by the fire sharpening his knife the way he did every night, except he had stopped sharpening it. Eliza sat across the hearth mending a tear in Asaz's trousers, and the firelight was on her face, and she was smiling at something, at nothing, at the warmth maybe, and my father was watching her smile with an expression I had never once seen him wear. It frightened me a little because I did not understand it. I understand it now. It was a man feeling something come back to life in his chest that he had buried on purpose and being afraid of it and not looking away. He caught me watching, and his face slammed shut like a cellar door, and he sent me back to bed. But I had seen it. The mountain that killed one woman was bringing another one back to life, and it was bringing him back too, and for 3 weeks it seemed the cold had been beaten. The cold had not been beaten. The cold was only gathering itself. On a Tuesday, my father loaded the sled with the last of his winter pelts and said he was going down to the hollow to trade before the deep snow shut the trail. He told Eliza to bar the door and not to open it for anyone until she heard his whistle. He stood a moment longer than he needed to in the doorway, looking at her, and then he was gone down the white trail with the sled, and the three of us watched him go. By mid-afternoon, the sky went the color of a bruise. The wind came up out of the north like something with a grudge, and the snow came with it, not falling but flying, sideways, and inside an hour you could not see the woodshed from the window. It was the front edge of the great killing storm, though we did not know to call it that yet. Down on the trail it caught my father in the worst of it. His sled runner caught a buried stump and snapped, and he was thrown. And by the time he got his feet under him, he could not see his own hands, and he had no choice but to dig in under a deadfall and wait the worst of it out, 3 miles below his own front door, with a dread in his gut he could not name. Up at the cabin, Eliza had us in the loft. She'd lit the oil lamp against the early dark, and she was reading us a story, and the wind was screaming around the eaves so that we had to lean close to hear her, and that is when the knock came on the door. It was not my father's whistle. It was 3 heavy blows, deliberate, a fist that meant to be heard over the storm. I felt her go still beside us. "Stay up here," she whispered. "Whatever you hear, you stay in this loft." And she went down the ladder, and she took the iron poker from the hearth as she went, and I leaned over the rail with Asaz's hand gripping mine, and we watched. "Mrs. Dunmore." The voice through the door was unhurried. That is the thing I remember, that it was not a wild voice. It was a patient, reasonable voice, which was worse. "It's cold out here. Open the door and we'll talk like sensible people." "There's no one here by that name," she said, which was a brave thing to say with her own name still hung around her neck like a stone. "Go down the mountain. There's a storm." "I know there's a storm, Mrs. Dunmore. I rode up through it on a man's instruction, and I don't intend to ride back down without what I came for." A pause. "My name is Garrick Pyle. I collect what's owed. Right now what's owed is a letter. You're going to give me the letter your husband wrote you, the last one, the one in his own hand, and then I'm going to go away." I watched the poker shake in her hands. "My husband is dead." "Is he?" said the voice, and there was something in the way he said it, a dryness that I did not understand then and that she did not either, not yet. "Open the door, ma'am. Don't make me come through the window. There are children in there. I'd rather there weren't trouble in front of children." And then there was no more talking. There was a crash as the rifle butt came through the window, and the shutter splintered, and the lamp went out in the gust, and the cold came into the cabin like a living thing, and Asaz screamed, and I clapped my hand over his mouth the way you do when you are 5 and trying to be brave for your brother. A gloved hand came reaching through the broken shutter, feeling for the latch. Eliza did not hesitate. I want that known. The town that called her a coward and a killer never saw her in that moment, but I did. She brought the iron poker down on that reaching hand with everything in her, and there was a crack and a man's roar of pain, and the hand snatched back. For one breath I thought she'd won. Then there was a gunshot, enormous in that small room, and would rain down from the rafters. And another, and the heavy bolt of the door groaned and gave, shot through from outside, and the door came open with the storm behind it, and Garrick Pyle stepped into our home. He was a lean man, gray, with a face that had decided long ago that nothing was worth getting excited about. His right hand hung wrong and bloody where she'd struck it. His left held a long pistol, and the pistol was level, and it was pointed at her chest. He kicked the door shut against the gale behind him. "That was foolish," he said almost gently. "Now the letter." "I don't have a letter." She had backed up until she stood beneath the loft ladder between him and us, and I understood without being told that she had put herself there on purpose, that the wall between Garrick Pyle and the two of us was made of her. Silas is dead. I have nothing of his but a picture in a tin case. You can have that. Take it and go. A picture. Pyle's gun did not waver, but something moved behind his tired eyes. He didn't say anything about a picture. He said a letter. The man's very particular about the letter. Eliza's voice changed. He who, Silas is dead. They buried him a year ago. I stood at the grave they wouldn't let me weep at. And Garrick Pyle, who collected what was owed, who was patient and reasonable and tired, made the mistake that tired professional men make. He told her the truth, because he could not see the harm in it, because in his arithmetic she was already a dead woman, and you may as well tell a dead woman anything. Mrs. Dunmore, he said. Silas Dunmore is the man who sent me up this mountain. He's been living in Helena under the name Marcus Thorne for the better part of a year, buying up every claim in this valley for 40 cents on the dollar and doing very well at it. He burned a drifter in that house and put his own ring on the man's hand and let them bury a stranger in his name, and he let them blame you for it, because a man who's dead can't be hunted for his debts, and a woman they're busy hanging can't tell anyone she watched him do it. He shifted his weight. You're the only soul alive who knows his face and his hand both. He'd forgotten about that letter until a man in Helena recognized the handwriting on a Thorne contract and made a joke about it where Silas could hear. Now he remembers. So, the pistol came up a degree. The letter. I did not understand all of it. I was 5, but I understood her face. I have spent my life understanding her face in that moment because it changed everything that came after. It was not a year of grief and disgrace that I saw go across it. It was a year of grief and disgrace getting set all at once into a single cold and perfect clarity. Every door that had closed on her, every back that had turned, every murderous hissed in the street, all of it suddenly hung from one nail, and she could see the nail. Her husband was alive. He had not died and left her his ruin. He had built her ruin, on purpose, brick by brick, and walked away whistling to count his money in a town downriver. The town had not failed to see the truth. The town had been handed a lie by a man who knew exactly how greedily they would swallow it. He's alive, she said, not to Pyle, to the heir, to the year. All this time he's alive. For now we're all alive, said Pyle, and I'd like to keep the number where it is. The letter, Mrs. Dunmore. I won't ask a 4th time. There are children in the loft and I have shot through ceilings before. She looked up at us then, one look, and I want to tell you what was not in that look because the town would never have believed it of her. There was no fear for herself in it. There was only us. It's in the flour tin, she said quietly. On the shelf behind you. And Garrick Pyle, professional to the end, made his second mistake, which was to glance at the shelf. The window exploded inward a second time, and this time it was not a gunshot and it was not a hand. It was my father. He came through the broken frame in a storm of glass and snow, with a sound coming out of him that I had never heard a man make and have never heard since, a roar without a word in it, the sound the mountain itself might make if you could make it angry. He had abandoned the sled 3 miles down. He had climbed the last of that trail in a whiteout that was killing cattle by the thousand in the open country, climbing on his hands where he had to, driven by that nameless dread that turned out to have a name, and the name was Garrick Pyle. When he'd crested the last rise and heard the shots come thin through the storm from his own house, he stopped being a man and became something simpler. Pyle spun and fired. The bullet took my father's coat and not my father, and then there was no more shooting because the distance between them was gone. My father hit Garrick Pyle the way a falling tree hits the ground. They went back across the room and through the heavy table, and the table did not survive it. And then my father's hand was around the man's throat, and his other hand, that great splitting and hauling hand, came down once. Once was all it took. The sound of it I will not describe. Garrick Pyle went loose all over and his eyes rolled up white and the pistol spun away across the floorboards, and my father knelt there above him with his chest heaving and the snow blowing in through the broken window and settling in his hair, and for a moment the red went out of his eyes slow, like a fire banking. Then he turned, and he was my father again, and the terrible thing in him was gone, replaced by a terror of an entirely different kind. Eliza, it came out of him cracked, not the landslide voice, a small voice for so big a man. He crossed the wrecked floor on his knees and his huge shaking hands found her shoulders. "Did he touch you? Are you hurt? Eliza?" "I'm all right." She was shaking so hard she could barely say it. He's alive, Silas is alive, I heard, my father said. I heard the last of it through the wall. He pulled her against his chest, and he held on to her the way a drowning man holds on, this man who had walled the world out, and he put his face down in her hair, and I heard him say it, the only time in my life I heard my father say a thing like it. I thought I was too late. God help me. I thought I'd lost you too. And then Asa and I were down the ladder. I don't remember climbing it, and we threw ourselves into the tangle of them. And Eliza pulled us both against her side so hard it hurt, and I was glad of the hurt. And the four of us knelt there in the wreck of the cabin with the storm howling at the broken window. And my father put one arm around all three of us at once because his arms were big enough to do it, and held us there. I did not understand that night what Asa had understood in the alley 3 weeks before. I understand it now. We were not four broken things that the cold had thrown together. We were the exact shape each of us had been missing. He'd seen it when he was 5 years old and asked to keep her. The storm raged through the night. My father bound Garrick Pyle hand and foot with trap wire and put him in the root cellar to think about his life, and he nailed a hide over the broken window, and he built the fire up high, and Eliza put us to bed in her own corner where it was warmest, and none of us slept much, and that was all right. In the morning the storm had blown itself out, and the whole world was white and blinding and still. And here is where the story turns from the others the town liked to tell. Because in the town's version this is where the marshals ride in and the gold is dug up, and the wronged woman is made rich, and the bad are punished by men with badges, and everyone learns a lesson. That is not what happened. What happened was simpler and I think truer. My father did not take Pyle down to Sheriff Tate, because Tate was a small soft man in the pocket of whoever had money, and Marcus Thorne had a great deal of money. He hitched the horses to the good wagon, and he loaded Garrick Pyle into the back of it like a sack of grain, and he took Eliza up onto the seat beside him with a blanket over her knees, and he drove the long way, 4 hard days through the snow, to the federal land office and the marshal in Helena. Not to be saved, to do the saving themselves. Because Eliza had the letter, not in the flour tin, that had been a lie to make Pyle look away. She'd had it sewn into the lining of the one good dress she'd kept, the last letter Silas wrote her before he died, full of love he had never meant, in a hand that was distinct as a fingerprint, all those crossed sevens and that strange looping D, and in the land office in Helena there were stacks of contracts signed by a man named Marcus Thorne, buying up the Crane's Hollow Valley for nothing from people who had no idea the valley was about to be worth a fortune to the railroad. The same crossed sevens. The same looping D. She laid the letter on the federal clerk's desk beside a Thorne contract, and she did not weep and she did not rage. She simply stood there, that woman the town had tried to freeze in an alley, and pointed at 2 pieces of paper, and let the truth be plain. And Garrick Pyle, faced with a federal judge and the choice between hanging alone or talking, talked. He talked about the burned drifter, and the false grave, and the man in Helena who'd built a land empire on a dead man's name, and a living woman's disgrace. They took Marcus Thorne out of his fine house in Helena in irons, and he was Silas Dunmore again by the time they had him in the cell, screaming that there had been a mistake, that he was a respectable man, that everyone knew him. The marshals did not appear to be moved by how well everyone knew him. And word came down the valley to Crane's Hollow, and the Hollow learned what it had done. There was no gold for Eliza, no fortune dug up, no reward. The land Silas had stolen went back to the families he'd cheated, which was as it should be, and not into her hands. What she got back was smaller than gold and worth more. She got her name. The grave that had borne Silas's name was found to hold a stranger, and the murder she'd been hung for in every heart in the hollow had never happened at all, because there had never been a murder, only a lie that a whole town had been so eager to believe that they'd starved a woman in an alley to keep believing it. They were ashamed. That is the part I find I cannot quite forgive them for even now, all these years on. They were so very ashamed once it was safe to be. Harlan Voss sent a wagon up the ridge in the spring loaded with flour and sugar and a side of pork, with a note begging her pardon. Mrs. Dell, who had told her the Lord would sort it out, called on the cabin in her Sunday dress to say how she had always, in her heart, doubted the worst of it. The hollow that had no room for Eliza Dunmore, when she had nothing, suddenly had a great deal of room for her now, that the truth had made her safe to be kind to. Eliza thanked them. She was gentler about it than I would have been, and she sent them all back down the mountain, the wagon, the apologies, the Sunday dress and all, because she did not want their flour and she did not want their pardon, having needed both so badly when they cost something, and being offered them freely now that they cost nothing at all. I asked her once when I was older why she didn't make them pay for it. She could have. The whole valley would have crawled. She thought about it a long while, the way she thought about everything, and she said the thing I have carried with me longer than anything else she gave me. She said the cruelty of a crowd is almost always a costume it wears over its own guilt, and that there was no use punishing people for a fear they dressed up as righteousness, because they would only learn to dress it up better. And she said the only ones in the whole of Crane's Hollow who had seen her true, who had looked at a freezing stranger and known her for what she was before there was any truth to make it safe, were two boys too young to have learned the lie yet. Everyone else had needed proof. Asa and I had needed nothing but our own eyes. She married my father that summer on the ridge, with Asa and me holding the rings and getting them muddled, in front of a circuit preacher and no one else, because no one else was wanted. She lived the rest of her long life on the mountain that the valley had been so sure would break her, and it never broke her, not once. She kept that little row of our offerings on the windowsill until the day she died. The jay feather gone gray and the mouse jaw and all of it, and she would not let a one of them be thrown away. The hollow tried for years to forget what it had done to her. I told you that at the start. They never managed it. A town can hang a woman without a rope, but it turns out a town cannot unhang her, not in its own memory, and the ones who'd watched her freeze in the alley carried the knowing of it to their graves. That was punishment enough. She'd been right about that, as she was right about most things. I was 5 years old the winter we found her in the snow, my brother and I, and gave her our coats and asked our father to keep her. People always want to know, when I tell it, whether I'd guessed the truth, whether something in me had known she was innocent. I hadn't guessed anything. I want to be honest about that. I didn't know about Silas or the letter or the grave with a stranger in it. I was a small boy, and the whole valley agreed she was wicked, and I had no reason on earth to doubt the whole valley. I only knew that she was cold, and that she had tried to give us the last thing she owned, and that when a man with a gun came up our mountain in a killing storm, she put her own body between him and us without a half-second's thought. A woman who owed us nothing, who'd known us 3 weeks. That is all I knew. It turned out to be enough. It turned out to be the only thing in the whole sorry business that anybody got right the first time. So if you take one thing from this, take that. The crowd is loudest about the guilt it's hiding, and the truth of a person tends to be plain to anyone who hasn't yet been taught what they're supposed to see instead. We saw her, we kept her, and I would do it again. Did the twist catch you off guard, that the man she was hanged for killing was the one pulling every string? If this story moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who loves a frontier tale told true, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of the old mountain country. Thank you for listening.